You know those stories that stick in your soul? That make us rethink everything we believe about life, love, forgiveness, and even ourselves? Well, this one, my friend, will move you in a way that you may not even be prepared for. In times when rushing is suffocating feelings, when many educators are suffocated by goals, numbers, and standardized tests, a single teacher decided to swim against the tide. She understood something that few dare to see. Teaching goes far beyond the content written on the board. Teaching is touching souls. It is healing silent wounds. It is, above all, creating space for each person's inner reconciliation. That morning, she entered the classroom carrying only an envelope, simple, discreet, but full of meaning. The students soon realized that something was different. It was not just another class. What was about to happen had no formula, script, or scheduled lesson. It was a deep dive into the most precious part of the human condition, what is not spoken, what is hidden, what tightens the chest and weighs on the soul. An unusual request, an assignment without a grade. And then, in front of young people accustomed to swallowing their emotions, she made room for each one to write what they had never had the courage to say, not even to themselves. The result? Words that had never been spoken took shape on paper. Secrets kept for years, requests for forgiveness, sincere confessions of fear, loneliness, insecurity, and above all, love. Students who had never hugged each other were now crying together, enveloped by a silence full of understanding and compassion. What seemed to be just another day of school became a turning point in the lives of everyone there. And the most impactful part was yet to come, because that teacher had a much greater reason behind all of this, a reason capable of bringing tears to even the most resistant hearts. Get ready, because this story is not only moving, it is transformative. In the end, you will understand why to this day the students in that class have never been the same, and maybe, who knows, you won't be either. That morning, the sun seemed less bold, hidden by dense clouds that covered the sky as if they knew something different was about to happen. The classroom, usually noisy with the laughter and loose conversations of restless teenagers, fell into a deep silence as soon as the teacher entered. There were no books piled up in her arms, nor her bag full of graded papers. Only a white envelope, almost crumpled by her trembling hands, revealed that this would not be an ordinary day. Her eyes, usually so firm and resolute, were filled with tears, as if someone carries in their chest a whirlwind of emotions that had been pent up for a long time. No one dared to say anything, the kind of silence that is not imposed but conquered by emotion. The students' gazes met with silent questions, full of fear and insecurity. And there, in that fragile and unexpected moment, an atmosphere filled with empathy, respect, and affection was born. As if hearts understood, even without understanding, that it was necessary to listen wisely. After all, it was not just any day. It was the beginning of something that, even though no one knew it, would mark everyone forever. She walked slowly to the table, as if each step were an emotional crossing between what she had always been and what she was about to become. She sat down, looked at the faces in front of her, some sleepy, others attentive, and took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. The envelope between her fingers trembled slightly, but the gesture with which she placed it on the table was of a delicacy that bordered on sacred kindness. No one knew, but in that envelope there was more than words. There was the power of kindness, the weight of memory, the courage of surrender, and the hope of a final gesture. She smiled, but it was a smile tinged with melancholy, like someone holding a farewell inside their chest, waiting for the right moment to release it. That teacher, who had so often guided with love, firmness, and compassion, now silently asked the students to be her guides too, to listen to her with humanity, to open up with humility. And in this silent request, an invisible bridge was drawn, made of trust, sincerity, and a generous dose of inspiration. One of the students, more attentive than the others, noticed the absence of the board filled with formulas or historical dates. There was no test scheduled, nor new content to be taught. There was only a different presence, a dense energy that filled the air like a forgotten perfume of longing. The teacher, who had so often taught that wisdom goes beyond books, at that moment was teaching without saying a single word. It was As if she knew that silence sometimes teaches more than 1,000 explanations, that it contains forgiveness, compassion, and even the space for altruism to flourish. As the hands of the clock moved slowly forward, each second seemed to carry an invitation to reflection. What if, instead of seeking answers, the students learned to listen to the silences of the world? What value would the sound of words have? There, compared to the strength of a sincere look, filled with emotion and love, everything indicated that what was to come next was not just a lesson, but a true emotional adventure, capable of transforming every soul present there. And so, the silence continued, not as an absence but as a premonition. With her fingers clasped over the envelope, the teacher finally broke the silence with a sweet but choked voice, as if she needed to summon all the courage she had accumulated over decades. Today, we will not have class as usual. Today, I want to tell you a story, she said, with a crooked smile and teary eyes that roamed from face to face. The room, already enveloped by a cloud of empathy and respect, seemed to hold its breath. Each word that came out of her mouth carried the density of a memory kept under lock and key, not out of shame, but out of protection. It was a story of pain, yes, but also of resilience, of humanity, of overcoming. The teacher revealed that, years before becoming who everyone knew, she had faced profound losses, loneliness, and a fear that seemed to have no end. She was abandoned when she was young, raised by a grandmother who taught her that true knowledge begins when you look into someone's eyes with compassion. As she spoke, there was no theatricality, only raw and sincere truth. The honesty of her story was like a gentle blade. It cut without violence but penetrated deeply, touching emotions that many there could not even name. She spoke of how she studied with difficulty, selling sweets at the school gate, receiving not only coins from strangers, but also gestures of kindness that shaped her soul. She told of the night she thought about giving up everything, but was saved by a letter left by her grandmother, whose words overflowed with hope, faith, love, and humility. There, she understood that teaching would be her path, not for status, nor for money, but because she believed in the transformative power of affection, empathy, and altruism. The students, in reverent silence, saw that woman with new eyes. The ordinary teacher transformed before them into an almost mythical figure with ancestral wisdom and an enlightened heart. It was like listening to one of those stories that grandparents tell in a hammock, with the smell of brewed coffee and the comfort of home. A student in the back, the most restless in the class, discreetly wiped away a tear. It was unusual to see an adult undress in front of them like that, with such sincerity. Many had never heard their own parents speak with such emotional honesty. The teacher's story, with all its marks and scars, awakened in them a feeling of reconciliation with their own lives. Suddenly, their own fears and insecurities seemed less shameful. It was as if that unique narrative echoed within each of them with an intimate and welcoming voice. The room, previously just a space for instruction, now became a sacred territory of healing and connection. The teacher spoke, but at the same time she taught something that no one would ever forget, that there is more wisdom in a story told from the heart than in hundreds of pages of any manual. And so, without rushing, she prepared the ground to reveal something even more precious, a lesson that could not be found in books. She paused. One of those silences full of meaning where it seems that time decides to walk with light steps so as not to disturb the moment. She looked at the ceiling, as if seeking inspiration in old memories, and then said something that no one there expected to hear. I spent years trying to teach formulas, grammar rules, dates, and events, but what I most wanted to leave with you, my dears, was not in the books. Those words echoed through the room like a warm breeze, touching the skin and the heart of each one. It was a call for understanding. Sometimes it is in the eyes of the listener that you measure the impact of the speaker. And there the eyes were attentive, vivid, filled with something rare, genuine listening. She continued saying that she always believed that the greatest learning in life is not in the repetition of content, but in the ability to develop kindness, compassion, forgiveness, and courage. Values that do not come up in tests, but that define destinies. She shared that for her, teaching was a mission of love. Not romantic love, but the kind that comes from the sincere desire to see another person grow, to see a student flourish even after falling 1,000 times. She said that over the years, she had collected victories that could not be written on report cards, like the student who, after a conversation, decided not to drop out of school, or the girl who found the strength to forgive her absent father. After hearing him talk about the power of kindness, stories like these don't make the newspapers, but they build the backbone of humanity. And she smiled as she remembered, her eyes shining with gratitude. It was living proof that true education is not limited to formal content. It seeps into gestures, advice, and small moments of listening and affection. In the simplicity of asking, "Are you okay today?" or realizing that the most irritated student is, in fact, the most hurt. At the end of that moment, a feeling hovered over everyone. A mixture of inspiration, tenderness, and the kind of admiration that only arises when faced with the truth. And in fact, how often do we forget that teaching and learning are human acts before they are academic ones? The teacher spoke with such honesty and serenity that it was impossible not to be moved. It was like listening to an old song that, even without knowing the lyrics, we feel like we have known forever. The students, touched by the silent wisdom of those words, understood that they were facing something much greater than a class. That was a legacy. It was as if each sentence left there carried a seal of hope for the future, an invitation to empathy, humility, perseverance. And without anyone noticing, each heart there began to open, ready for the next step, without imagining that an unusual request would soon appear, full of meaning. After sharing stories that touched every soul present, the teacher took another deep breath. Her gaze was now serene, almost maternal, but there was a different spark, like someone about to reveal something that could change everything. She then stood up slowly, opened the envelope that had been in front of her since the beginning, and took out a stack of white sheets of paper. They weren't tests. There were no grades. It was a proposal, an invitation, a challenge from the inside out. She looked at them tenderly and said, "Today I want you to write, not about what you learned in class, but about what is kept deep inside, deep in your heart." A soft murmur took over the class. It was a simple request, but full of affection, kindness, and transformative power. Write what you've never had the courage to say. It can be to someone, to yourselves, or even to me if you want, she concluded with a shy smile. That proposal didn't seem didactic. It felt like a hug. Some students frowned, as if they didn't quite understand what was being asked. Others immediately lowered their heads, overcome by an emotion they couldn't explain. The most curious thing is that even those considered more distant, more difficult, seemed touched by the emotion of the moment. One of them, who always said that school is no place for feelings, now held the pen with trembling hands. Because deep down, when someone looks at us with respect and believes in us sincerely, something changes. And there, in that unexpected request, an invitation to reconcile with oneself was born, with the pain, with the silences. It was as if, in that moment, she had opened a window inside each student, allowing the light of hope to enter, even where fear and loneliness had long since taken hold. There was no right or wrong, only truth. And what courage does it take to face the blank page, right? The teacher walked slowly between the rows without saying anything else, just offering sheets of paper and a look that said, "I'm here." And that for many was all they needed. It was no longer just another task. It was a chance, a liberation. It was as if that blank page was a portal to something deeper, the forgiveness of an old hurt, the courage to say a choked, "I love you," or the confidence to look at oneself with more humanity. That moment became a silent ritual of internal revelations. There was no music, but one could hear the sound of emotions flowing in the form of words. It was impossible not to be moved. The class, which had begun in silence, was now filled with Another kind of stillness, that of introspection, of compassion, of love that pulses even when the voice fails, and without realizing it, they were about to write letters that would change their lives, and hers too. The blank sheets of paper lay on the desks like silent mirrors, inviting each student to delve into a territory often avoided, their own heart. The mood in the room was one of retreat. Some stared at the paper as if it could read their most intimate thoughts. Others closed their eyes before writing in an attempt to find the courage that so often hides. The teacher, now sitting in the back, watched with a loving gaze, almost in prayer, like a guardian of other people's emotions. And then the words began to emerge, slowly but intensely. Letters to absent parents, to silent loves, to past versions of themselves. It was as if each one there understood that this was more than an exercise. It was an act of liberation, of hope, of forgiveness, and above all, of honesty. Because when the soul decides to speak, it is not always pretty, but it is always true. A boy wrote to his sister who had died in an accident. Another to her father, saying that she forgave him for yelling and not showing up. A girl, who never raised her hand in class, wrote to herself, "You deserve to be loved." And there, in that gesture of intimate trust, seeds of transformation sprouted. It was incredible how that seemingly simple task revealed deep wounds and at the same time began to heal them. The teacher knew, words have weight, but they also have wings. And that's why she chose this path, because teaching with affection also means showing that love, when written with truth, can touch where no other gesture can reach. It was the kind of lesson that stands the test of time, that continues to teach even years later. And the most beautiful thing was seeing that no one was there to judge. The respect was so great that the room seemed protected by an invisible dome made of empathy, wisdom, and compassion. The teacher then did something that no one expected. She asked everyone to fold their letters and put them in an envelope. Keep this safe. Read it again in 5 years. You might be surprised at how much you've grown. This speech fell like a gentle prophecy, one of those seeds that bloom slowly. She also suggested that some could deliver the letter to the recipient, if they felt like it. Sometimes what transforms a relationship is precisely the courage to say what has never been said, she added with a sparkle in her eyes. It was at that moment that some students stood up, went to her and delivered their letters. Without words, just with hugs. The emotion overflowed. That room, that day, became a temple of reconciliation, a space where altruism and affection reigned supreme. And while the tears flowed discreetly, everyone knew those letters would never be just pieces of paper. They were maps for internal reunions. And of course, what came after that, no one was ready to hear. A few days passed, and the atmosphere in the classroom was never the same again. There was something different in the air, as if the students had looked at themselves in the mirror for the first time with understanding rather than judgment. The teacher returned with the envelope in her hands, but now she was not carrying just blank sheets of paper. She carried inside the reflection of the soul of each student who dared to be honest. She asked permission to share some of the letters, and to everyone's surprise, many said yes with teary eyes. One by one, she read excerpts. She didn't say their names, but everyone knew who had written what. Not by denunciation, but by identification. With each line revealed, the room was filled with a wave of silent emotion. There was no mocking laughter, no shame, only empathy, respect, and a deep affection for each other's pain. It was as if suddenly everyone remembered that they were in the same boat with similar fears, fragile dreams, and an immense desire to be accepted. One of the letters spoke of loneliness. "I smile every day, but I feel invisible." Another, "Third love. Dad, I just wanted to hear I'm proud of you at least once." There was one that brought tears to even the toughest student. "To my past self, you survived." Those words, even written by young hands, carried the density of someone who has already faced more than they should. The teacher read with the delicacy of someone holding something sacred. The class listened in silence, with their eyes fixed on the floor, on their hands, on their emotions. It was there that true learning manifested itself, not in formulas, but in the construction of bridges between hearts. The courage of those words inspired something transformative, a feeling of belonging. The invisible walls that separated the students seemed to crumble, giving way to hugs, sincere looks, and even apologies. The room was no longer a place of instruction, but a temporary home where humanity could breathe without fear. The teacher then closed the envelope and looked at everyone with the serenity of someone who knew she had planted a powerful seed. She simply said, "These letters have taught me more than any course. Thank you for trusting me." And at that moment, the roles were reversed. It was the students who learned from her the value of humility, and she who learned from them the great impact that a gesture of trust can have. One student asked to speak. He stood up, took a deep breath, and said, "We didn't know we needed this. But now that it's happened, it seems like it was all that was missing." That caused an immediate commotion. Smiles through tears, looks of gratitude, and the birth of something that you don't see in report cards, real bonds. What none of them knew, yet, was that this strong connection was about to be put to the test, because there was yet another revelation to come, and it would change the course of that story forever. The teacher remained silent for a few seconds, with the envelope still between her fingers, as if it were her anchor for what she was about to say. The students noticed that there was something different in her eyes, a cloudy glow, as if she was struggling between strength and fatigue. It was then that she took a deep breath and said, in the strongest voice she could muster, "There is something I need to share with you, and this may be the hardest part." Hearts sank, and a reverent silence took over the space. The reason for all of this, the letters, the request, the story, is because this is my last class. A restrained murmur ran through the room like a breath of disbelief. I received a diagnosis a few months ago. I need to take care of my health, and that means I need to step away. Those words pierced the soul of each student with the delicacy and pain of an unexpected farewell, yet full of wisdom. She continued, trying to smile through tears that she could no longer contain. She said that at first she felt fear, insecurity, and overwhelming sadness. But then I thought, I don't want to leave with just past experiences. I wanted to leave something that would flourish, something that even when I'm no longer here will continue with you. That's why she planned everything, the letters, the story, the initial silence, the atmosphere of love and reconciliation. That permeated each gesture. She wanted each student to understand before leaving that life goes far beyond what we see. That resilience is born from pain but grows with hope, that affection heals, and that someone's greatest legacy can simply be having touched another soul with kindness. At that moment, tears began to fall, silently. Even the most resistant ones gave in to the emotion. It was impossible not to feel the weight of that moment, and at the same time the lightness of the teaching embedded in each word. And then, as if in a collective whisper, the room was taken over by an avalanche of emotions. Some lowered their heads, others stood up and walked towards her, hugging her tightly. Those wrinkled hands, accustomed to writing on the board, now held the emotional faces of students who would never have imagined learning so much in a single class. The teacher, even though frail, transmitted an almost supernatural strength, the strength of someone who lived with purpose, the strength of someone who chose altruism over complacency, the strength of someone who, even in pain, finds space for love, hope, and forgiveness. "It's not goodbye, it's a new way of being present," she said, "because you will carry this moment within you, even when everything changes." And there, in that sacred moment, everyone understood the true meaning of leaving a legacy. But what the students would do with it was something that only time would tell. The news still reverberated in their hearts like thunder that insists on echoing after a storm. The teacher had opened her soul and left there, in front of everyone, the most fragile part of herself. And it was then that something unexpected began to happen. The students, one by one, began to stand up, but not on impulse nor out of desperation. It was as if an invisible force, driven by love, empathy, and compassion, was guiding them. They approached her carefully, with their eyes full of tears and their hearts overflowing with humanity. They said nothing, They just hugged her, and that simple gesture became a kind of collective ritual of affection. There was no longer any distance between teacher and student. They were just souls, touched by the same moment, enveloped by a feeling that only arises in those who have truly learned what it means to be human, and it was in this atmosphere of emotion and respectful silence that the idea was born. One of the students, the one who rarely participated, raised his hand and with a choked voice said, "We want to prepare something, to show how much you are a part of us." The teacher tried to hold back her tears, but it was too late. Within minutes, the students began to organize a small tribute. Posters, messages, a song she always played at the beginning of classes. Everything came together spontaneously, as if each one wanted to return, with humility and gratitude, everything they had received. One of them suggested that each student leave their letter inside a decorated box, like a trunk from time immemorial, and that the teacher take it with her. "That way you will have a little piece of us close by," she said, smiling through her tears. That touched her heart deeply, and once again, it was impossible to contain her emotion. The next day, the surprise was ready. When the teacher entered the room, she found the lights off, soft music playing in the background, and all the students lined up, holding handmade flowers with phrases written on them, words like courage, wisdom, trust, hope, forgiveness. In the center, the box with the letters, a symbol of the purest surrender someone can make, that of their own heart. When she saw it, she put her hand to her chest, trying to contain the tears that insisted on coming. She couldn't. She cried. But it was a beautiful cry, full of affection and gratitude. There, in that room that had so often echoed lessons about verbs and equations, now something much greater resonated. The power of kindness, the generosity of those who have learned to love. And it was at that moment that she realized that, even though she was leaving, she would leave in each of them a spark that would never go out. And the most impressive thing is that that gesture was not the end, it was just the beginning. As the weeks went by, the teacher's story didn't just stay within those four walls. Like everything that is true, touching and driven by love, it spread. First through the school hallways, where even the most skeptical began to look more kindly at their colleagues and staff. Then on social media, where students shared excerpts from the letters, excerpts from the tribute, and most importantly, excerpts from her, the woman who taught like someone who embraces. And it didn't take long for the entire city to find out. The educator who decided to say goodbye, leaving a gift of affection, compassion, and humanity in the hearts of her students, had become a symbol, not of idealized heroism, but of real resilience. It was the kind of story that made people rethink their attitudes, their silences, their emotional distances. Because deep down, everyone knew there are teachers who mark grades, but there are those who mark destinies. The school received visits from other educators who wanted to understand what had happened there. Principals, educators, and even journalists showed up curious about the case of the letter teacher. But what they found was not a revolutionary teaching method, nor a far-fetched teaching strategy. What they found was a living testament to what respect, understanding, and altruism can build. They found students who were more united, more empathetic, more aware of their own emotions and the emotions of others. They found an environment in which emotional honesty was no longer taboo and became a tool for growth. They finally found a new definition for what it means to educate, not just to instruct, but to form whole human beings. The teacher, even though she had already been away for health reasons, was still present in every gesture she had inspired, in every sincere good morning, in every apology, in every tight hug. Her legacy, like a pleasant perfume, lingered in the air, and it was not only among the students that this legacy germinated. Some parents, touched by their children's stories, began to act differently at home. There was a father who started saying, "I love you" every night, a mother who asked her son for forgiveness for not listening to him as he deserved. There was even a grumpy neighbor who showed up at school with a bouquet and a handwritten letter, asking for them to be delivered to her. Because when someone touches us with the power of sincerity and example, it is almost impossible to remain the same. That woman, with her envelope and her trembling voice, had rekindled hope in many people. It was as if she had lit a candle in the midst of darkness, and that modest flame was spreading from heart to heart. The most beautiful thing. She never wanted glory. She never wanted recognition. She only wanted to teach. And without meaning to, she taught what she didn't even know she knew, the power of kindness. And there would be more, because years later, that last lesson would still echo. Time, with its silent and relentless march, followed its course. Years have passed since that day when the letters were written and hearts opened. But curiously, that lesson was never forgotten. Many of the former students were now adults, carrying with them the marks of that unforgettable morning. Some became teachers, others doctors, some fathers and mothers, and in each of them the seed planted by the teacher flourished in a unique way. Even today, when they face difficult situations, they remember the words of affection, courage, and resilience that they heard that day. When they need to forgive, they remember the weight and lightness of forgiveness. When they feel fear or loneliness, they remember the value of hope and compassion that she taught. That lesson, far from the books, remained alive, pulsating like a candle that never goes out. One of the students, who at the time had written to his absent father, became a psychologist. It was in that letter that I understood the importance of saying what we feel even when it hurts, she used to tell her patients. Another, who had written to himself asking for courage, became a motivational speaker, helping young people find strength in their vulnerabilities. And there were still those who silently applied what they learned in daily gestures, listening more patiently, reaching out when someone fell, offering a word of encouragement to those who needed it. Small actions, but they carried the enormous power of kindness. At reunions of former students, the memories always came back. The envelope, the blank sheets of paper, the group hug, the sincere tear. Everyone knew that that teacher didn't just teach subjects. She had transformed souls. Even those who never saw her again felt her presence, as if a piece of her lived in every choice they made. Some kept the original letter to this day, folded with care like a map of their own growth. There was a silent reminder in them that life is fragile, but full of beauty when lived with love, empathy, and gratitude. And when from time to time news about her would surface, like a note from a former student saying they had come to visit her, or a public letter of thanks, everyone would be moved again. The lesson remained. The greatest education is that which awakens the humanity in us. And even as the years passed, that last lesson would continue to echo, like a gentle whisper in difficult times, reminding them that no matter how much life changes, what is true remains, always. Now I ask you, how many unspoken words do you carry inside? How many hugs postponed? How many requests for forgiveness kept hidden by pride? How many declarations of love stifled by fear? The truth is that we all have an invisible envelope inside, our chest waiting for the right day to be opened. But what if that day never comes? What if time doesn't give us the second chance we hope for? This story shows us something powerful. Life doesn't wait. It's the courage to act in the now that transforms. It's the simple gesture, the everyday kindness, the forgiveness offered, the empathy practiced even when the other person doesn't deserve it. Because in the end, what remains are not the grades, the diplomas, or the perfect answers. What remains is how much we touched the people around us. Like that teacher did. So I invite you, how about starting today? Write that message. Call someone who needs to hear your voice. Ask for forgiveness, thank them, love with courage. You can be the turning point in someone's life, and especially in your own. And if this story touched you, if it made you reflect, if it lit a light inside you, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and share it with those who need to hear this message. Here, we continue together, learning, growing, and reclaiming what really matters, our humanity.